Welcome to the Retirement Lifestyle Show. I'm your co-host, Roshan Loungani, here as usual with Adrian Nicholson and Erik Olson. We have an important topic for today. This is the last one in what's turned out to be a multi-series election-focused discussion. We want to talk to you about the markets, the election, what to expect, and we are less than 2 weeks away. We're recording the day after the debate. So, gentlemen, any thoughts initially? Adrian, what did you think of the debate?
I thought it was a lot more organized this time. I thought it was very clear, not a lot of people jumping over each other like last time. So I thought it was a little bit more organized and staying on the topics and the issues that they were discussing, whether it was the economy, climate change, healthcare, racial issues in the United States. So I was really glad they were really kind of sticking to the topics and the issues that were going on in today.
Yeah, it definitely was. I'm sure you noticed this too, but you could see when the mics were off. Like there were certain times when either one was talking and it wasn't their turn, and you could see their lips moving and kind of hear them, but not completely with the mics off. It was definitely more organized. Erik, what did you think?
Well, first of all, I didn't watch it from start to finish. I just I had another event that was overlapping, and once I finally did start watching, I kind of wanted to turn it off because I just didn't have patience for a lot of the stuff. But I would say it was a much more civil conversation this time than last, and it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. In some ways, I to a certain extent, I thought it was a ruinously bad debate for Donald Trump the first time around because of his interrupting. And so to a certain extent, strategically, if I had been, advising the Democrats, I might have said, don't put a mute button, because it's precisely his boorish behavior in the first one that if we can get him to replicate it in the second one, we should see another dive in his polling. So I think the fact that it was more civil to, whether, depending on your point of view, probably it works in to a certain extent in relative terms, just on that one factor at least, it works in Trump's favor. So we'll see how it's interpreted by the people, though, right?
Yeah, I was actually, I've found that I've been able to sort of detach myself from the fact that this is for the highest position in the country. And if you're able to do that, it actually is kind of entertaining. Like after the first one, I thought was just crazy, and then I was approaching this one like a sporting event. Like, should I order wings and get drinks and everything going?
I should have thought of that
for this one.
Last night they had 89-cent nuggets.
There you go.
Yeah, I'm right there. I'm right there with you, Roshan. I mean, I was surprised. That night I was on social media, and a lot of people my age were just posting about it like it was like a Super Bowl or a sporting event kind of thing. Like it was almost on everywhere I went. It was pretty much there, and people were like kicking back and like watching with their friends, having like food and drinks and all that stuff. So I guess the entertainment element is definitely there on a very important moment in U.S. history.
Maybe we should just have a perpetual election with, every Friday night WWF SmackDown or something like that. The Presidential Commission on Debates could just keep this party going.
That's kind of what it was like, right? When wrestling shifted from being wrestling to them talking on the microphones. That's kind of what this was for a little while. Let's bring it to our topic, though, today, how the debate does line up. We want to talk about the election and the markets. We've got less than 2 weeks, and I know we've all pulled some points of discussion today. Adrian, I'm going to start with you. What's one of the points on your list of the election, the markets?
I'll just take this from a more individual standpoint. As an individual investor, I think it's important now to really look at your asset allocation. I think that's extremely important. What assets are you really invested in, and what your percentage are to each one? The market has pretty much recovered a lot since what it was at in March. So maybe you might have a lot of exposure to stocks, and if that's where you want to be right now, if that's what your risk capacity could take, then that's what you should hold into. But if maybe you need to adjust that more to kind of fit who you are as an investor, it's time to really look at that and consider and see what type of adjustments you should be making so you're able to respond depending on what the outcome is, because there is a lot of uncertainty going into this election and markets really don't like uncertainty. So the biggest thing that you can do is just making sure your portfolio really reflects what you need in your financial plan, what you're going to need in the future, and to make sure a really important part where you should maybe start when it comes to the election and the marketplace and how it pertains to you as an individual.
Yeah, that's a good point. I always think that getting back to your target allocations make sense, right? It should reflect you as an investor. And Adrian, are you saying almost regardless of who wins, if you're at your asset allocation, that is it's kind of where you should be?
It's definitely a starting point. And in a previous podcast, we also talked about defensive strategies and opportunistic strategies, and that's great. But again, you have to really look at what you can take and what you cannot take when it comes to investing in certain asset classes, and especially when there's uncertainty in the market, just to really go back to your investing principles and really stick to it in a tough time, especially when there's uncertainty in the market.
And let me just chime in there for those of our listeners who have not heard them. If you are wondering what's this that they're referencing in terms of these earlier episodes, I think it's episodes 22 through 27. With the exception of, I think, episode 26. So in those 5 of those 6 episodes in succession, we dealt at length with various aspects of this, and we worked from the assumption at the outset that since the polls were showing that at the time, we were working from the vantage point of let's assume a Democratic sweep. So if you're interested to hear that, it's again available to episodes 22 to 27 minus 26, I think.
Yep. And Erik, while you're talking about the episodes, let me actually ask you about one of your points on this. What's an important point you're seeing with the elections and what you can do as an investor?
Well, first, let me just respond to what Adrian said, because he's talking about portfolio positioning in the face of this. This isn't so much working from a policy standpoint and what the various candidates' policies or the party's policy proposals might do for the markets or for the economy, but just looking at the election process itself. So earlier this week, we had the Supreme Court rule to not override the Pennsylvania Supreme Court to allow the people to submit ballots as late as 3 days after the election with no clear evidence that they were postmarked on or before the election. So I think we're going to have, and that's just one example of a completely different approach to the election this time, which is, I think, going to lead to a prolonged uncertainty about the actual outcome. Even if we've talked, there's been this a phrase developed, the red mirage. Even if it were seemingly that Donald Trump had won the measurable vote by election night, that doesn't mean that there wouldn't be inflows of mail-in ballots that would be changing the outcome of that election. And then I think there will be plentiful amounts of litigation in the event that that's true, particularly if the mail-ins would change the outcome of the election. So I say that because as you, Adrian, said, if markets do not like uncertainty, and we all agree on that point, that prolonged uncertainty could be rough for the markets for a while, which doesn't mean, again, that a year or 2 or 5 or 10 from now that your portfolio would have suffered. You just would have had to have braced yourself in the interim for some amount of heightened volatility. I think that's something to be expected, unless there is an overwhelmingly decisive outcome on election night, in which case then you can measure or at least make some inferences that the mail-ins could not override that outcome. But I don't think we're there And we might be, but I don't think we're there. We'll know in, 2 weeks' time.
Yeah, well, and Erik, you bring up a few things. I want to explore this a little bit. Uncertainty is bad for the markets. A contested election is the one negative outcome, right? Mm-hmm. What I've been researching and seeing is, regardless of the reason, whoever wins, I actually think the markets will react positively to. It just depends on when. Mm-hmm. Like immediately after, there'll probably be a little bit of reshuffling in down markets mm-hmm. because of different people in power. But if you fast forward 6 months, a year down the road, I think with all the stimulus, the markets will be up. Either way. But if you have this uncertain time frame, let's say hypothetically, I'm concerned about this uncertain. I believe that's going to be the outcome. And for all our listeners, these are not recommendations. We are licensed, and we're not giving you recommendations on a podcast. So these aren't recommendations. I just want to explore this hypothetically. So Erik, I come to you and I say, I'm worried about this uncertainty. I want to put all of my investments against this scenario of uncertainty. And I know you would try to convince me not to do that, just being a good advisor to bet on one concept or idea. But let's say I wanted to do that. What would you do if I'm thinking this election will be contested, that'll lead to drops in the market and volatility? How do I prepare in advance?
Well, all right. So it depends on whether you're more inclined to do a significant portfolio recomposition before all of the election.
I want to put all my money on this one idea.
Yeah.
Not a good idea not that the idea is bad. I'm just saying doing one idea in your portfolio, I'm sure you're thinking that's nuts. I just like these extreme examples I think they help get the point across.
All right. Well, I suppose so. You are more aware of the risks and the opportunities in this category than I, Roshan. But I think if that were the case, and I had to go with all one idea, and again, I'm thinking this is a terrible idea to go with one idea. But if you're asking me in this scenario, I think the properties of options make for an interesting way to position your portfolio or protect your portfolio. So if you said, "Hey, I'm going to buy some put options and I'm going to buy some call options out of the money."
Okay.
And I'll know that the market is probably going to go one direction or the other. And if it goes, and the reason I say out of the money, incidentally, is, and I'll explain that for our listeners in just a moment. But the reason I should explain that and then give the concept. When we say in the money or out of the money, we've talked about options before. And if you want to go back, I think it was episode 26 in which we went through and we talked about different tools. And I think options was part of that. Maybe there was another episode before that. Hold on,
Erik. I'm gonna back you up a little bit, even further.
Sure.
And let's go with some simple numbers and examples. So options in general are a leveraged way to bet on a deal. Leverage meaning you can take $1 and invest it as if it's 5, 10, or 20, depending on how you're doing this. Mm-hmm. And you're not actually buying the security, you're buying the option to buy or sell a security. And Erik, as you were saying, out of the money or in the money, if a stock is trading at $100 and you're betting that it'll go up, if you buy an option that is at a strike price at 105, that means that's the price where you're actually starting to be profitable. That's out of the money.
Because the market isn't there yet. That's why we say out of the money. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And same thing on the way down. Erik, you mentioned put options. If you buy puts, you're betting the market will go down. If the market's at 100 and you're buying it at 95, that means the market has to drop below 95 to get there, meaning it's out of the money.
Right. And in the money would be either I buy a put and a call at 100, or I actually buy a call at 95 and I buy a put at 105. So either way, but the reason I say out of the money is just because I think at this point it's a little too expensive to do it in the money. So, and I'm trying to think of a strategy that doesn't get too crazy. If the markets don't go crazy, if there isn't a lot of volatility, folks, I'm not saying the markets are going to go crazy. I just think there's going to be heightened volatility, which isn't the same as going crazy. But if there's, if the markets go dramatically up, then my put option, well, I paid money for it, but it expires worthless, but I'm able to exercise my call and buy what is now a much higher market at a price much closer to where it originally was. Or if the market drops significantly, then my call option expires worthless. I had to pay for that, but it didn't harm me hopefully too much. But my put option now, which using the example that you gave, Roshan, which I had set at 95, if the market has dropped to 70, I'm not saying it will, I'm just saying if it did, I would be able to sell my positions to someone else. When the market is trading at 70, I'll be able to sell those positions for 95. So, but again, I'm going to come back to this. Why did you offer this this scenario where I can only do one thing? So that's, folks, I'm just responding to this wicked request of Roshan to always simplify it to the worst extreme.
Well, yeah, and I'll tell you, I have a different response to that same question.
Okay.
I want to give Adrian a chance to chime in, though. So, Adrian, if I come to you and I say, I think there's going to be, the election will be uncertain, it'll be contested, there'll be lawsuits, and I think that'll create volatility in the market, and I want to invest everything I've got to this one concept, what would you say to do?
Well, the first thing I'll say is, in the market, there's always ways to reflect your beliefs. So I think that's what you're going for, and it kind of explore all those options to see which one would be the most damaging to you, and which one you would be most comfortable and most suited for. That would overall not only protect your portfolio, but you'd be able to get those as much gains as you possibly could, because you're trying to, again, reflect your belief in this outcome. So I think that's would be the biggest thing, to try and lay out all your options and looking at all those options, doing the research, looking at the data, and seeing what would be the best way to go about this. Because there are a lot of investing tools, investing vehicles out there. We mentioned options, leverage, inverse ETFs. There's just a number of them. And to really narrow it down to see which one would be the best for you, I think is a great starting point.
Yeah, definitely looking at the different things available and choosing them. Erik, I'll tell you what I was thinking with that same question. And Adrian, I definitely researching it and looking into where to go. So Erik, I would say yours has the highest potential for profiting on uncertainty, right? In either direction, you would profit from uncertainty. I was actually taking a little bit of a different thought, and I was saying I'd probably go to cash, right? And just because if I think things will go down, I go to cash, and then I can go in and get it at a deal. Just because my expectation is that a contested election leads to declining markets. So if this person came to me and came to you and I said go to cash and you said buy put options, I'm definitely agreeing that the put options would make more money. There's no arguing that at all. The whole reason I was thinking go to cash, though, is just because, and I'm sure you were thinking this, the put options are just riskier. Right, you can, depending on how you do it, you could literally lose everything in this portfolio with put options, or make a killing. Right, whereas on mine, that with the cash, I think you can wait it out and buy, and your worst outcome is missing the opportunity of the gains.
Yeah, and I think liquidity is an important part when it comes to opportunity, depending on what your asset allocation is. Having a portion in money markets or cash, whatever it may be, will give you the opportunity to respond or capitalize on certain opportunities.
Well, so I guess I would say I don't think I would lose everything in this strategy, because I would certainly lose. There's a possibility if the markets stay in a very narrow range that I could lose the cost of both the put option that I purchased and the call option that I purchased. But if it moves, if there is indeed a spike in volatility, it would move one way or the other. And if I just don't know which, then I would be able to profit, I think, enough on the one side to cover the cost of the other side of that expired worthless.
And Erik, I'm just saying it's conceptually possible you get these short-term calls that and the market doesn't move and they expire worthless, thus losing it all.
Oh, and
now
I see.
You see what I mean? I'm not saying you would do that. I'm just, your scenario to me has a lot more profit potential and a lot more loss potential,
Okay, all right.
whereas mine is more opportunity cost. Not saying yours is worse, right? If the markets shoot in either direction, you'll make a whole lot of more money doing that than the. And I'm not gonna call it yours or mine. I'm just gonna say the concept of the options, and I believe what you were describing is a spread versus going to cash. There are very different potential for gain and loss in that scenario.
That's true.
That's kind of it. I'm sorry for putting you on the spot like that. Just the gridlock and all this uncertainty that we were putting out there made me thinking, well, how can you actually execute on these ideas,
Yes.
or what are some of the things we can come up with? But Adrian, as you said very well, there is a lot more that you can do than just these two things we came up with off the top of our head, and you've got to figure out where the risk reward parameters fall in line. Like if you can take your entire portfolio towards the concept and bet so much you could lose it all, or take your entire portfolio towards this one concept and have actually very little risk involved. Let's go on though to the next thing. Next thing on our list, I want to throw one thing I read from multiple sources, and this is going. This concept really, the first I saw talk of this was about 2 weeks ago, and the concept was the markets are all driven by stimulus. So a Democrat sweep, if the Democrats sweep, that's the best thing. And even though that would mean tax hikes, the stimulus would far outweigh them. So that would be the best for the markets. I'd love your thoughts on this.
Adrian, you want to respond to that?
You can start out, Erik.
Okay, so I would say it's likely that there would be a stimulus, as you have said, if it's an all-Democrat House, Senate, and White House, no question. And that absolutely, we've seen that the combination of fiscal policy, that by that, folks, we mean spending, and also we mean tax policy to a certain extent, although it's slightly hived out from that, and then monetary policy, which is to a large extent in the hands of the Federal Reserve. Those two things have a significant impact, obviously, on where the markets will go. But I would say if you look at it, you have to look at it, I think, in short term and long term, and you have to look at it both from the vantage point of markets and economies. So there's a saying that I think I think this was attributed to Benjamin Graham, which was that in the short term the markets are a betting machine, in the long run they're a weighing machine. Am I getting that attribution correct, that it's Benjamin Graham?
It's Graham, and the short term is a voting machine, I believe.
Voting machine.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And what did I say? A betting machine. Okay, a voting machine and a weighing machine. So in this case, if you inject a big fiscal stimulus into the economy, the markets will respond well to that, both because of the actual economic activity that fuels, but also I think the markets view that as positive, and so there's a psychological effect. The question is in all these things, and this isn't true strictly, this isn't true for one party or just the other, it's true for both parties. You have to ask, what's the long-term economic impact of that? And that will feed back into what's taking place in the markets. On top of that, I would say the taxation policy question is another element of it, in part because of the response of both investors to what might happen to companies if the corporate tax rate is changed, and then also how they might actually go about investing based on how their own taxes would be affected by all of this. And if at some point before we end this podcast today, I'd like to try to get into some of the nuts and bolts of the tax proposals that seem to be flowing from the Biden campaign and the Democratic Party. I say seem because this campaign has been much less willing to be explicit and extensive in their statements about precisely what tax policies or fiscal policies they would pursue. I mean, for example, Elizabeth Warren's campaign, very crystal clear about all their plans, and Bernie Sanders, very clear about an extensive list of plans, whereas in the Biden administration or the Biden campaign's case, they haven't been quite as specific and consistent about their various tax policy proposals and fiscal proposals. So, but I would like to get into that because I think it's germane for our audience.
Well, let's do that now. And I have to ask you before you start on that. Did you see 50 Cent, the rapper? He said, "Vote for Trump. I don't want to be 20 Cent." And he had a picture of Biden's tax plan for New York. And they started saying stuff like, "Well, I hear it's nice in Texas because of how high the taxes are." But why don't you go ahead and start off? What are you seeing in the tax plan, or what are you not seeing that you'd like to see when you say they have not been forthright with their plan?
So, for example, one of the categories so I'll just. I don't think this is the most important part, but since you've asked that question, let me just respond to one of the parts that hasn't been quite as clear. So a lot of our clients are investors not only in their tax-deferred accounts like their IRAs, but also they're investors in after-tax, what we call non-qualified investment accounts. And those accounts are subject to taxes on the income generated from real estate investment trusts and from bonds, and then also from dividends, from stocks, and then also from capital gains in the different things. And as our listeners undoubtedly understand, the taxes on qualified dividends and on long-term capital gains are 15 for most people, 20 for some, and in some cases, if you're affected by what's known as the net income investment tax, then they can layer on another 3.8%, bringing you to a 23.8% rate. But in any one of those, whichever of those rates is yours, those are going to be lower than your ordinary income tax. And none of those is affected by a payroll tax. By that I mean Social Security and Medicare withholdings. And so in the Biden proposal, there is as I understand it, if your income at the household level is above $400,000, and by the way, most of our listeners are not in that category, but many of our clients are. So if your income is in excess of $400,000, then number one, on that income, on the earned income, the best understanding of what they've proposed is to layer a 12.4% payroll tax on that income. So in other words, it phases out about $130,000, and then you just keep paying Medicare at 2.9 if you're self-employed, and half that if you're a W-2 employee. But what they would, under this plan, at $400,000 and above, they'd kick back in onto the 12.4. Or again, if you're a small business or a partner, or half of that if you're a W-2 employee, your employer paying the other half of that. But here's the part that isn't 100% clear. They're saying the Biden proposal is we want to treat, if you're above that level, we want to treat your capital gains and your dividend income in any of your investment income at the same rate as your earned income, meaning that it would be potentially as high as, under current tax law, 39%, 39 and change, close to 40%. If you layer on the Medicare component and restore the 12.4 on the as a payroll tax on your investment income, now you are being taxed at an effective rate of about 55% at the federal level on investment income, with no special provision for long-term capital gains. And then if you're in a high tax state, let's say like a California, where you at the marginal rate can go as high as I think it's 13.3, you're now paying in excess of 68% at a marginal level on your investment income. And so I think what will, if that's the case, and that's where we lack some clarity, is about whether that payroll tax would be applied. But even if it's not, it's pretty significant jump under this proposal. So how will investors respond to that? Will they be
Erik,
indifferent to that? I don't think so.
Let me break down some numbers on this, and I know Biden's number is 400,000, but currently capital gains rate go up over 441. So you pay 15% in capital gains right now. If you have over 441, 450 in income, it goes up to 20%. So let's start at that number. Currently, let's say you're over 450 in income. You pay 20% in capital gains. Now, from what I've seen, and tell me if I'm mistaken, that capital gains rate, there is agreement that Biden is saying that capital gains rate will go to ordinary income, and that tax bracket is going to go up from the current 35% number, or let's even go higher. Let's say your income's even higher because the max right now is 37. So the top tax bracket would go to 39.6. So that's just an income. Your capital gains are going to go from 20% up to 39.6. So that part in the Biden plan, that's clear and undisputed, right? You're going from roughly 20 to up to 40 in capital gains. Correct?
Right.
Now the part that there is not clarity on is the payroll tax part, whether that'll be added on or not. And wherever you live, the state tax is going to be added on, right? That currently is the case. So that's nothing new. So let's break it down. So with what we know for sure, with his new tax plan, you make, and I'm using that higher number again. Just he says over 400, it'll impact you, but just so I can use the top tax bracket. If you're single, it's over 518 in income. If you're a married filing joint, it's over 622. So if you're over either of those levels, you currently pay 20% in capital gains. That could go up to 39.6. Now, Erik, let's continue there. How do you think investors' behavior will change?
Well, I will. Let me respond to that. So, and let me just come back. Why did I suggest that? I said there's lack of clarity about the payroll tax being added onto that. I think that one of the principles that's been articulated is that investors should not be given preferential treatment against wage earners. I think that's been a philosophical premise of the Democratic Party platform. And so if that's the case, I'm thinking if they're saying, hey, we're going to apply this 12.4 to earned income, wage income, then consistent with our philosophical principle that the investment income should not be preferenced, then that leads me to believe that it's likely to be philosophically consistent that they apply that additional 12.4% as well as the 2.9% for Medicare. So
I'll tell you, I disagree with you that that's what they're going to do.
Okay.
But the reason I disagree with you is because you've just never had payroll taxes on capital gains income before. So I don't see how they'll add that on. I'm not saying it's impossible, nor am I saying you're wrong about it. I do disagree. I just want to have our discussion be on what we know. Right?
Okay.
What Biden has clearly said is that if you're over that income level, your bracket's going to go up to 39.6, and your capital gains rates will be taxed at ordinary income. And to me, that's sort of a big enough jump where any investor decision will likely be the same with or without the payroll tax added on.
Right. So I think you asked me the question, and I will answer it, but I've done more than my share of talking. So let me ask you guys what you think the investor response would be to that.
I have not given this much thought before you just asked it.
Okay, then I'll answer it, and I'll buy you some time to think about it.
I'll go ahead and I'll tell you the first
sure.
thing I'd say. If you're an investor, I could see investors moving more of their money to tax-deferred accounts from taxable, right? So, and I hate talking about annuities ever because people really passionately are for or against them.
Right.
And my response to that is it's right for some people, it's wrong for other people. Let's figure out what's right for the individual that I'm talking to.
I agree with that.
But anyway, the whole point, the advantage to something like a variable annuity is the money goes in it on an after-tax basis. You don't pay taxes every year, and when you take it out, you're taxed at ordinary income. The knock on annuities was that if you just invested and you got a more favorable capital gains rate, you'd pay a lower tax.
Right.
So my first thought would be, especially now, annuities, another big knock on annuities is they were very expensive. They used to lock you in, and now there are a bunch of low-cost annuities that let you move in and out.
Right.
So if you eliminate the historical knocks on annuities and you introduce something where you could pay taxes every year, and now there's no tax differential, it's ordinary income in either case, I could see annuity sales going up. Maybe we should then invest in insurance companies because annuity sales would go up. I think that would be the first natural reaction that comes to mind.
So, well, first of all, I think you're right. So clients are not, our clients and our listeners are not insensitive to tax policy. And so I think you're right that these low cost, completely liquid versions of annuities, there will be wider adoption of that simply because for clients and listeners, who are not acquainted with the tax treatment of these, the money that you put in there is tax deferred. And so you pay taxes on it when it comes out as income, and you pay ordinary income taxes on that. But which for some people means you can time it to a point in your future when your earned income might not be as high. Maybe you're retired, and as a result, you're now back in a lower tax bracket, and you can start taking money out at a lower rate. So I think that's one option. I think some forms of cash value life insurance, which has similar properties to that. In fact, potentially withdrawals can be made without paying taxes. But I think another one would be exchange traded funds that are not dividend paying. In other words, there's been a real preference among many investors for high dividend stocks and high dividend ETFs. I think in this case, they'll be saying, "Hey, let me opt for the low dividend version, because now I can keep this locked up in what is in every other way a very tax efficient structure, the exchange traded fund."
Eric, let me jump in here for a second and just go on to continuing on your theme. Mm-hmm. So you're saying that dividends get paid to you and you as the investor don't control them. Mm-hmm. They get paid by the corporation. Mm-hmm. And if they're qualified, you get tax favorable treatment. Mm-hmm. So you're saying that you'll see more money flowing away from dividend stocks so that you can control it. And I was interrupting you just because I could see this going a step further.
Okay.
If you're a corporation now, wouldn't you then favor stock buybacks over dividend payments?
Yes.
Your investor can then choose to sell whenever they want and pay the tax by selling their shares versus getting dividends when the corporation decides.
Yes, I think that's going to be a rational response on the part of corporations, although I will note, while I haven't heard the Biden campaign talk about this, I'm 90% sure that it was the Warren campaign that had been saying they wanted to look closely at restricting buybacks again. I should probably check that before I say it, so listeners, please understand. This is just from a deep memory. I didn't come prepared with that fact, and if I'm wrong, I apologize in advance. But but I think there is that sentiment to say, because they recognize the maneuver that this provides to avoid that tax tax avoidance strategy is that they would just restrict it. I have one other thing, Eric, big point that I want to get to, but did you want to respond to that?
Well, just on the tax point, I would also say that people have always figured out a way around these things, right? Not tax evasion, not illegal, tax avoidance.
Avoidance.
So I also think whatever the new tax plan is, somebody's going to come up with some really good idea on how to minimize those taxes.
Yeah,
but go ahead. What is your
we
next
talked about it in a previous podcast. Finding the right asset for the right account too is extremely important. And we sometimes focus on the cost structure of certain assets, but going into an election and during this time, knowing the tax implications and how they can change is also a very crucial element to all this. So it's all really great points that we're bringing up, especially in light of this election coming up. But yeah, Erik, you can continue on that point that you had.
Yeah, Erik, you said you have one more point to make?
Well, I have 10 more points, but I'm going to lead with one, and then I'll let you as the
one.
moderator
I got
decide.
one too.
So we're talking about markets and economies, right, and how they would respond to one or the other. So I think it is one other thing that we've talked about so far. We've been really isolated on with respect, at least to tax, on the personal income tax treatment. But I think it's also important to think about the corporate income tax treatment. And so let me just start with a little bit of a history lesson. So over the last 40 years or so, worldwide, corporate income tax rates have been consistently dropping. It was in the 80s, it was common worldwide for the corporate income tax to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 40%. Over time, there's been this competition among countries to bring that lower and lower and lower. Why? Why would countries do that? Why would they alter their corporate tax policy? Because it is just like in a regular market economy, where the person who can sell a set of headphones for a few cents or a few dollars less than someone else selling a comparably good pair, that price competition is, they're looking to win consumers to their equally good but lower cost product. Well, it's the same thing in the international competition for business development. And corporations are looking in many instances where they have a choice, multinationals at least, when they have a choice about where they're going to focus most of their taxable activity, they're going to look for the place where they're going to have the most favorable tax treatment. And so the United States had been on the high side of the median. It had been coming down, but it was on the high side of the median and wasn't moving down as quickly as other countries were. Well, with the Trump administration, corporate tax rates were cut to 21%, which was not dramatically lower than the median, but somewhat lower, about 3% lower than the median tax rate among developed countries around the world. I'm leaving out developing countries for reasons I think are obvious. Their economies are smaller, and so and their philosophies sometimes are somewhat more.
Erik, you have to note this for the listener. It went from 35 to 21.
Right.
That's huge.
Huge.
It was 35 before.
And with that, if you're a corporation and you think this could be a permanent change in policy, you're going to say, well, all else being equal, I'm now more inclined than I was before that change was made to do business in the United States, which has a benefit to the economy and which has a benefit for the markets. But if you now say to companies, hey, we're going to raise it not all the way back to 35, but we're going to split more or less the difference, and we're going to raise it 7% of the 14% where they were dropped and put it at 28. We're now again on the upper. We're above the median. We've said we want to move to a position of less competitiveness, not as bad as we were before, but less competitive than we were than we were at 21. What will that do? I think a rational response would be, is my stock of XYZ Corporation now worth as much if beginning tomorrow it's going to have to cough up 7% more of its profits to the government, and instead of distributing them to me as an investor, or either in the form of dividends or in the form of internal reinvestment or in the form of stock buybacks, one way or another, that's not helping my company. And therefore, I don't look at my stock as being worth, as XYZ stock, as worth as much tomorrow as I thought it would be. So I'm gonna sell some of those shares, or whatever the case might be. My point is that I think the higher the tax rate on companies that don't have quite the capacity to locate their profits wherever they want to worldwide, that will be all else being equal, penalizing those stocks because of those companies' profitability on an after-tax basis being harmed.
Yeah, and I think that's the more direct line. You were talking about people selling shares, but it'll directly lower their earnings. I think there's a couple other things you mentioned that I want to give further information on. First is I just found via the Tax Foundation org site that across 176 countries, the average is 24.18. So you were describing us as the United States going above the mean. So 24.18 is the mean, and we'd be going above that, as you said, with the new Biden plan.
Right.
And then just for comparison purposes, the highest income tax rate, highest corporate tax rate that they have is the United Arab Emirates is at 55%, and the low is Barbados at 5.5. So I wanted to give the range as well as the median.
I don't want to get overly geeky about this, but you have to look at two tax rates in conjunction with one another to arrive at what is the full corporate tax rate. So if you say, hey, the corporate tax rate is at 28, but then when they distribute dividends to an investor class, that investor class now has X, the amount that they then pay on the dividends, that's really a kind of double taxation. Wait, the profits were taxed once. Yes. But then when the after-tax profits are distributed to investors, they've got another tax rate. So you have to put those two tax rates together. It's not purely additive. It's tax rate number one and then tax rate number two on the remainder. But if you're looking at somewhere then in some cases, let's say a 40 or 45% tax rate, in when the two are put in conjunction with one another, it's really, really harmful.
Well, Erik, if you look at Biden's plan and you're a top income earner at 39.6, and then the corporate tax rate is now
28.
What was it? 28. So you're at 67%.
Yeah, and folks, here's the math on that. So the 28% on 100% of the profits, that's at the corporate level. Now 72% of the profits are distributed, and someone pays, let's say, 40% on the 72. That's another effect. We'll just round it. We'll just say that's another 28%. So 28 and 28, that's 56% of the profits before the government got to capture those, and the investor was left with 42. So, and then there's state tax on that as well. And if you're in California, have fun with that because now you're paying 13% on the 72. And so now we're back, it's another 10%. And so it's 68%. So you got, and then final result, a very profitable company, 32% actually got to flow to somebody other than the governments.
Well, and then the other thing with thinking everyone working from home, pandemic, and the way technology is now, if you're a corporation, why not move to Barbados and pay 5.5%?
Well, so some people, and then I think many of our listeners are going to say, "Hey, Erik, you clearly have been highlighting the adverse result, and the energy in your voice betrays that you view this as somehow unjust." But what you're not commenting on is all the good that the 60, the 58 or the 68% out of every dollar of corporate profitability that is flowing to governments is actually going to be used for good things. And so, listen, I understand. I certainly do understand that. It's just the. So that we have to have then, I think, a conversation about whether the good that an individual might be able to do with their own funds, not just for themselves, but for others, versus the good that the society would do with those funds through the auspices of the federal and state governments, which of those is a better social outcome. But I'm dismayed. I will acknowledge the prospect that the taxes could capture that much of the energies and the final profits of these companies.
Yeah, I'm sure that can be heard in your voice, and I mean the numbers are what they are.
Yes.
With that, I want to give one final point in closing. Get your thoughts on it, and then we can wrap up this episode. But the one thing is, regardless of who wins,
Right.
you fast forward, let's say 6 months to a year. The markets will be up, and I'll give you some data on it, and I'd love both of your thoughts. If you have a unified Republican, Congress and president, average S&P rate of return is 14.5. Unified Democrat 14.5. Divided with the Democratic president 15.94. Divided with the Republican president 6.99. You could argue on some of these that there isn't enough data, so I won't necessarily argue the statistical relevance of it, but those are the numbers. So if those are the numbers, doesn't that kind of say no matter who wins, in general, things go up? And if you historically going up the most is with the Democratic president, it's slightly different. The extremes are slightly different, both positive. So is a lot of this people like us just trying to have listeners to a podcast, sell newspapers, or sell ads on TV?
Well, I wouldn't say so. I would say I think we want our clients to be mindful of some of the things that don't get discussed a lot. We hear a lot of the politics, and lots of the debates have not really been diving into the details of tax policy, or fiscal policy. But I want to throw a few leads to people, and we'll post these in the show notes. But as you can imagine, different analytical organizations have developed models, and these are econometric models, so that they by that I mean they use statistical procedures to try to forecast what a shift in this amount of fiscal activity, or this amount of spending, or this amount of taxation, what that would accomplish as it filters through the economy over a long period of time. And of course, every one of those models is not strictly based on empirical information. In some cases, it's based on assumptions, and those assumptions can be lead to very different outcomes. But I want to point you to some studies that you can look at yourself, because I know some of our listeners are research hounds like this. And this is from left to right to center. So you, Roshan, mentioned the Tax Foundation. So I would encourage you to go to taxfoundation.org, and you can track down their study here from October. Many organizations have released tax policy analysis and fiscal analysis here just in mid-September to mid-October of 2020, because now they're really trying to get down to brass tacks with the most information that's been released by the campaigns. Again, not as much from the Biden campaign as historically been the case from campaigns, both Republican and Democrat, but still it's there. So taxfoundation.org. If you're looking for something that's on the definitely on the progressive end of the spectrum, you could look at the report coming out of Moody's Analytics, and that's led by Mark Zandi and his team. They're putting the likelihood of a Biden White House and a Republican Senate and a Democratic House as a 40% probability. And other scenarios with mix and match all the way out, with different probabilities assigned to that. But they are very bullish on the impact that a Democratic control of all the House, Senate, and the White House, very bullish on what the outcome would be. If you're looking at the other end of the spectrum, you'd be looking at things from the Heritage Foundation. So they have released a study, as well as the Hoover Institution, as well as AEI, the American Enterprise Institute, which is a libertarian think tank. And then the Wharton School at University of Pennsylvania has also done some analysis. So and finally the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, has their 10-year forecasts. So what I would encourage you to do is to dig into the numbers for yourself, and you'll be able to ascertain which of these arguments you think is more plausible than the others. But it certainly, we're going to see some effects by this, and I would just encourage you to educate yourself, acquaint yourself with this information, and you take that into account as you vote, if you haven't done so already.
Yeah, interestingly, I saw that they're saying as much as, I believe it's a third of votes may have already been cast nationally. Wow. Yeah, it's a huge number. Huge number. Adrian, Erik, anything else to add or anything else to share with the listeners today?
Yeah, I like the resources you pointed out, Erik, and I think that's just important, just looking at the numbers and data and research now, especially during an emotionally charged time. Mm-hmm. It's always important to really just navigate the best you can through it, just to make sure you're really on track with your goals and you're really staying the course. So that's always a good place to start.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Adrian, I like that. You've said this a few times, but it always comes back to your goals and your plans, what'll impact your life day to day. To all our listeners, as we always say, thank you very much for joining us. We hope you found this helpful, and that there's something you can actually do with the information. Please like, subscribe, give us 5 stars, tell your friends and family about us. This has been the Retirement Lifestyle Show, and we'll be back again next week.